Hello and welcome to Beermance Episode 3. My name is Philip Davis.
I'm Angela Davis.
And we're here to talk yet again about another topic about beer basics. So today's episode we're going to talk about hops. Last episode we talked about malts, grains of different kinds used to make the basic wort of the beer. And I didn't mention wort until just now, but wort is just a term that brewers use for the sugary sweet liquid that comes out of the grains and then gets into the boil kettle where they boil it. Now, one of the things that comes next into a beer is the hops, and that's put into the boil. Hops is used basically for two general reasons in brewing. One is for bitterness and for its antibiotic properties, and the other one is for flavor. Well, I guess bitterness really is part of the flavor. Antibiotic properties is the first one, and then bitterness and flavor are the second. So somewhere back in time in history, they've found that putting things in the beer would help it last longer. And then someone later down the line found that hops specifically tasted a little bit better than probably what they were using before, and hops has stuck ever since.
Weed, I don't know.
Yeah. So hops is just a plant. It's a kind of a leafy growing vinous plant that they grow in farms and cultivate and do all kinds of great hybridizations and mixing to make them get different kinds of flavors. But the antiseptic properties help keep the infection out of the beer, make it last longer. And then the second part is that of flavor. And the flavor parts that it adds into the beer are bitterness and flavor. So the bitterness is something that is measured generally in a scale that you'll quite often see on bottles that says IBU. That stands for International Bitterness Units. IBUs are just a measure of how bitter the beer is. And as a reference point for a lot of you that do drink the general American Pilsners, like the Budweiser or the Miller or those kinds of beers, or the Golden Lagers, they tend to have generally maybe 10 to 14 on that scale. Big American IPAs and double IPAs and these big, really strong beers that Americans really are more fond of climb up into the near 100, if not over 100 range. And there's even some that probably go quite a bit over 100. So that's, to give you scale, it's 10 times more bitterness in 100 than it is in a 10. So the IBUs just help you. If you look on a bottle that has IBUs, it'll give you a sense of how bitter that beer is going to be.
Can you explain what the bitterness is? That like a kind of flavor in your mouth, or what does the bitterness mean?
Yes, so there's a lot of different kinds of flavors in your mouth. I'm definitely not a cooking scientist, but you have sweet, you have salty, you have bitter. There's different kinds of flavors, and the bitterness, to me, the best way to explain it is kind of like a, not quite a pinch, but a feeling of strong in the back of your mouth. It's kind of in your tongue, and it's a very kind of a, maybe a tingly sensation. I'm not even sure if that's exactly right, but you feel it in the back of your mouth, to me.
Is it kind of an aftertaste? Is that what I sense so strong on? Because I love the smell of hops. Like the one you were growing, is it Cascade? Cascade.
Yes.
I love Cascade. I love the smell of it. It just smells really good. But is that the after effect, the bitterness? Is that what you think might be causing the massive reaction that I have to beer?
Possibly, I'm not sure, and I can't tell your palate for sure.
Right.
No, I know the bitterness is something that doesn't quite hit up front. To me, up front, most of the beer that hits you is a little bit of the aroma. You'll also get some of the tingling from the carbonation, and then the bitterness kind of comes a little later. But
okay.
I don't know for sure. It seems to me quite often when you react, it's a little later. So maybe it's something else that's just in the flavor of the beer. But so this beer that we're drinking today, by the way, and we'll sample a little later, is a German-style Hefeweizen. We'll cover that in our tasting session a little bit later. But basically, hops can then be used not only for this bitterness, but also for flavor. And it's really amazing the kinds of things that they do with the bitterness. They take the hops and they hybridize all kinds of amazing flavors into them. Some of them have a very fruit-like flavor. Sometimes, like the Cascade you mentioned, has kind of a great fruity, citrusy flavor. Yum. There's several variations of citrusy ones. Some of them that taste more lemony. Others that taste more like, say, a passion fruit or a mango, or kind of hybrids of those. And sometimes you can't quite put your finger on which flavor it is, but you'll know, oh yeah, this has a very fruit-like flavor. And it's very obvious. Others will have more herbal or spicy notes. Some of them are kind of peppery. Some of them maybe just more like flowery or herbal kind of in note. And those sometimes it's kind of hard to say, oh, I think this tastes like a specific herb, but you can tell it still feels kind of a flowery or herbal kind of flavor.
Okay.
And then others might even have a slight kind of earthen flavor, or just kind of, that's probably the best way to explain it, but you'd only know it by getting to taste some of those. And that kind of is on that borderline between the herbal and then the earthen. They kind of, are very similar. And I probably don't have the best palate at kind of differentiating all of those, but I know that that's the types that I will see and read and understand. So the other thing that's pretty incredible about hops as well is how they're used in the boil determines how they put the flavor into the beer. At the very beginning of the boil, they put the hops in that are what are called bittering hops. Those ones in the boil rolls and turns and churns out every bit of aroma and just kind of blows it into the room and out of the actual thing.
The wort, right?
In the wort, yes.
Okay.
So the wort is the boiling beer right as you get it off the grains. It's called wort at that point. Then they add the grains. Then they add the hops, and that boil then just starts creating a kind of like a heat into the oils. They're called alpha acids in the hops, and releasing out all of their bitterness. But the boil pretty much pushes out a lot of their flavor. There's a touch of it that arrives, and some of those beers that you have that'll have a slight flavor will quite often not have had anything but boiled or the bittering hops. They'll just throw bittering hops at the beginning and boil it out just to get the bitterness and move on their way. But then imparting that sense of a strong citrusy note or other kinds of notes as well comes from the leaf itself, from the plant part of it. So those are put in late editions. So they're called late edition hops, or very ending of the boil. Sometimes there's one called a flame out where they'll throw it in right as they turn off the boil. That adds some of the bitterness because the heat still is able to pull some of the bitterness off, but then also you get the aroma. And then the last kind is what's called dry hopping. Dry hopping is used when the hops are thrown into the beer after it's done fermenting and it's cold. That way you get zero bitterness out of it and pretty much 100% of the flavor. And you get different kinds of flavor because the cold imparts different flavors than heat would. So dry hopping creates a different kind of note. So you can see you have 3 different spots where you can add flavor to the beer with the hops.
Do people generally use the same hops for the bitter and then for the flavor to keep the flavor the same, or sometimes do they throw the boiling for the bitter hops in and then they use a different one as a flavoring later?
A little bit of both, basically. Okay, sometimes you will want to, some hops work really well as bittering and aroma hops. Others, if you put them in as aroma hops, they don't taste very good. Okay. So those are only used for bittering. So it's really just what people have tested and experimented with and found that works well. And
do you know, if you're dry hopping, does that create a chance to have bacteria? Or is the antibacterial properties come from it being heated up as well, or is it just because it's in there?
The hops themselves as a plant have an innate ability to just protect themselves from bacteria. Okay. So the dry hopped ones are generally themselves not a source or a chance of infection or bacteria, but that phase of the brewing is the danger zone. After you get out of boiling temperatures, that's where any infection can come into a beer. So dry hopping itself generally is not dangerous. The problem more is what do you put the dry hops in, and do you make sure that's sanitary and clean? And so the brewers have processes that make it very easy to do.
Like those weird cheesecloth type sock thingies.
Cheesecloth can be reused, but in reusing you need to make sure it's very well sanitized so that you're not adding bacteria into the wort or into the fermented beer at that point.
Cool.
And the one final thing that's an interesting thing of note as well with hops is a lot of brewers lately have started using what's called fresh hops or wet hops. They will get the hops as it's harvested off of the hop bines. The bine is the term for the vine in the hops. Okay. They'll literally just throw them right into a beer they're brewing right then and there on purpose. That gives a quite different kind of a note or a flavor, because otherwise hops are generally harvested, dried, and then freeze preserved, packaged into nitrogen bags where they suck out all the oxygen that can cause oxidation and flavor changes. And then they're stored in cold temperature for a year or so while people are using them over time. Right. But these are fresh right off the vine. They don't even dry them, and so they add a completely different kind of note because the plant is wet instead of dried and all that. It changes the flavor in a different way that's becoming very popular right now as well. So, yeah. Well, that's about all we have to really cover, I think, right now on hops. But if you have any questions, please hit us up in the comments section. We'll be happy to talk about it. And if we find that there was something important we missed that you guys bring to us, we'll make sure we bring that up on another episode. Well, thank you everybody for listening. Have a great time drinking some more beer, and tell us what you think. Thanks.
Drink responsibly.
Hello, and nope, we didn't forget. It's time for the beer tasting part of today.
Yay.
All right, so today's beer we're doing is a German-style Hefeweizen. You'll notice it's a bit cloudy. The wheat tends to do that. Some brewers know how to do it so that the wheat doesn't end up cloudy, but generally a wheat beer is cloudy like this instead of being clear. Most beers, cloudiness is kind of considered a fault, except in the case of wheat beers where it's required. It should be there because the wheat tends to add this cloudiness.
Okay.
Also, the German beers like this tend to have a strong yeast flavor to them. So the yeast is not only kind of a bready, yeasty kind of feeling like you get from bread. And the Germans often joke that bread is kind of like or beer is like bread, liquid bread.
Liquid bread, okay.
But the yeast also has really cool properties. Depending on the German particular yeast strain, some of them have banana flavors, some of them have clove flavors, and some of them kind of have both. And this one, I've been sipping it a little bit right now, and off the top of my head, I'm trying to remember if I noted either one specifically. So I'll go ahead and do that now and think it through. And this one seems to have maybe a very subtle banana, but I definitely sense the clove flavor to it. And it's a really great beer. They're easy sipping, and they're good ones as an intro beer. Some people like American Hefeweizens, which are really just American wheat beers.
Is that like Budweiser, or is that?
No, they're
that's IPAs.
No, those are Pilsners.
No, I'm learning.
It's okay. So American beers like that are golden lagers, and they're called a Pilsner. So an American wheat beer generally looks cloudy like this too, but they use an American yeast strain that doesn't have that strong banana and clove flavor. And although those are pretty tasty beers, to me, I really like the kind of character that comes out of this particular yeast strain that has this kind of character to it. But so, it's a great beer.
All right, so I will smell it.
Mm-hmm.
And I get what you're talking about with the banana, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, there's no citrus of any kind.
No, there's not a heavy hops usually used.
Maybe I almost smell like apple, but maybe that's just the banana. Okay.
Okay.
Oh boy, wish me luck.
Wow, she didn't completely and totally melt down on that one.
No, yeah, that didn't have the. Okay, it does a little bit, but.
And that's possibly the bitterness, but this is a very low bitterness beer.
Right, so maybe it's not the yeast, maybe it is the bitterness from the hops, but. So yeah, I don't know. It's a little.
Okay.
I'll have to, practice to try and find the flavors. Right now I'm just trying to see if I'm going to gag or not. But I can, yeah, cool.
Okay.
I didn't gag.
Awesome.
Yay.
All right, everybody, there you go. There you have it for another episode. Have a great one, and we'll talk to you soon.
Drink responsibly.
Yep. Cheers.
Yummy.